Hi, my name is Tony Foster. Over a series of 12 weeks, I'm going to take you through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to take you according to the book, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and especially I'm going to use this book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which was written in the early 50s to try to explain better what the 12 steps were about. Those of you that know a little bit about AA might know that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written in the 30s, and the language of that time is somewhat hard to understand for people who don't know the language well. In the 50s, this was written to make that a little bit easier. So why would I want to do this, and why am I qualified to do this? First of all, I have a master's in mental health and in rehab counseling. I have a PhD in counseling, but more importantly, what makes me more qualified to do this is I've been in recovery for over 20 years. I'm coming up on 21 years. I've been through the steps myself as a sponsee probably 5 or 6 times with different sponsors, but I've also done the steps with sponsees literally hundreds of times. I've been through a lot of seminars on the steps. I feel like I have a really good understanding and feel like I can explain the steps in a way that makes it easy for someone who doesn't know much about them. So we're going to do a step a week. We're going to start though by reviewing the 12 steps one after the other, just so that you have a good overview of what the 12 steps are. One of the reasons I really like this book is that if you go to the front of the book, and again it's 12 steps and 12 traditions, it's really the sister book to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you go to the front of it, there it says right in the contents the 12 steps, and each chapter is on a step, and it also gives you a highlight of those steps. So today I thought I would take you through the basics of the 12 steps and give you the highlights of each step. The next time I will be doing the first step, then the second step, then the third step, and so on. So why don't we get started? Step number 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. And you know, a lot of people think that the first step is the only step you have to do perfectly. I don't think that's actually written anywhere, but I've heard it a lot in AA meetings. I believe that there's 2 or 3 steps that have to be done really well, but obviously step 1 is an important one because we have to admit that we're powerless over alcohol, right? So we admitted that we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, it's not and that our lives had become unmanageable, it's that our lives have become unmanageable. Those 2 things can be separate, okay? But when you have untreated alcoholism, generally they come together. So the book tells us who cares to admit complete defeat? Admission of powerlessness is the first step in liberation. Relation of humility to sobriety. The mental obsession plus the physical allergy. Why must every AA hit bottom? Well, when we do step 1, I'm going to go through several reasons why every AA has to hit bottom. I'm going to talk about what does a bottom mean and what happens after you've admitted that you have a problem. Because as they say, the first step is admitting the problem. Okay? So let's talk about step number 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now this says a lot, even though it doesn't seem to say a lot. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It's saying that there is a power greater than ourselves, and many people who try to get sober don't believe that there's a power greater than ourselves, and could restore us to sanity. What does that mean? I know for me, I had a hard time believing that I was insane, even though an outsider might look at my actions and the actions of other people in my circumstances and see that to them I was obviously insane. But let's see what the synopsis says. What can we believe in? AA does not demand belief. The 12 steps are only suggestions. the importance of an open mind, variety of ways of faith, substitutions of AA as a higher power. In other words, this is not a religious program. This is not us telling you to believe in a certain thing. For me, I'm going to tell you that it's about believing in something that's greater than you. There's a reason the sun comes up every morning. There's the reason the birds are there. There's a reason the tides exist. I can't tell you what that is, but I know it's not me. There was a time in my life that I could have been convinced that it was me. That's part of the issue many times in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I would say to you that in my almost 20 years of being a sponsor and ultimately being a therapist and a teacher and a program director and a clinical director, that ego is a big part of relapse. Almost always ego is involved. So let's go to step number 3. Now, it's my belief, this is just Tony speaking, that step 3 is the turning point of the whole program. It is also the only step that in this book tells us that if you get this step, you have a great chance of getting the program. But it also tells us if you don't get this step, then you're going to really struggle to get sober. That is the only step in the whole book that tells us that. So the book, in a sense, is telling us step 3 is very, very important. So step 3 says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, some of you may be choking on that sentence. Turning my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. What does that mean? Does that mean that I all of a sudden go around smacking people in the forehead saying, yay, you're cured, and becoming one of those people? Doesn't mean that at all. It means living your life a certain way. It means turning things over to a higher power when you are struggling with things. It means surrendering. Step 3 is about surrender. And we're going to learn when we do step 3 that there's 2 surrenders in the process. And when you can understand that surrender is a way of winning, not a way of giving up, you're a long way to getting step 3, and then you're in pretty good shape. Okay? So step 4. Step 4 is a step where a lot of people stumble. I hear from a lot of people over my 20 plus years, oh, I did steps 1, 2, and 3, and then I relapsed on step 4. 1, 2, and 3 relapsed on step 4. The implication of that is that step 4 is so hard. Step 4 is hard. It's time consuming. It means taking an inventory of your life, those things that you've done well, those things that you haven't done well, those people that you've hurt, those people that have hurt you. And it's a hard, honest, sober look at yourself. But I believe that people that stumble on step 4 is because they haven't done a good enough step 3. These steps are set up in the order that they are for a reason. You do a good step 3 with the knowledge that step 4 is tough and you have to take a hard look at yourself. So therefore, step 3 gives you the faith to be able to turn it over to a higher power. So let's look at step 4 real quickly. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Okay. Now I've already talked a little bit about the summary of that. It's an inventory, which means both positive and negative. Of course, those of us who are trying to get sober and trying to live a sober life have a tendency to look at the negative and try to fix that. And that's true. But it is the positive things too, because most of us who have gotten sober over the years have had positive things that we've done in our lives. We're generally not the guy living in a refrigerator box under the railroad tracks. We're generally people who have succeeded and worked hard in a lot of things in life, but we just can't put the drink down. So step 4, we're going to go through in depth when we do step 4 as the entire session. So step 5. Step 5, I would say to you, is one of the most misunderstood steps in the book. Step 5 says, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. Okay? So God, ourselves, and another human being. It's very easy to say, well, God knows everything, right? If you believe in God and you believe in a higher power, well, he must know everything. Okay. I'll give you that one, even though I could argue about that point. Ourselves, we know what we did. I'll give you that one too. But telling another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, and that's the misunderstood part, the exact nature of our wrongs. Because as you go through that inventory that you did in step 4, and as you relate that inventory to your sponsor, he is taking notes, and he's finding commonalities in the things that you've done. So that at the end of your step 5, the exact nature of your wrongs becomes a summary, usually of 3 or 4 or 5 things that have become part of your character, what we call your character defects. Okay, so if you, let's say, as a kid, you went into the candy store and stole candy, and then you stole money from your mother's purse as you got older, and then you padded your expense report. You're a thief. That's a character defect. And we go through all these to try to establish your character defects, the exact nature of your wrongs. It takes a sponsor who knows what he's doing or she's doing to ask you the right questions to get to that point. Okay, it's not simply a presentation on your part. So let's go to number 6 now. Step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Okay, we've now presented our inventory to our sponsor. During that process, he's come up with the exact nature of our wrongs, or as I would say, or the book would say, our defects of character. And now we're ready to get rid of them. This is when we're starting to turn for home, so to speak. Now we're starting to work on things, not so much of the past, but how we're changing. This is when we start to really change. This is step 6. Okay. Now we're on to step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. How does that happen? Well, again, we've used the word God and him in a sense of as a God. And again, I have to say, I'm not looking for you to believe in my God or anybody's God. I'm looking for you to believe in something greater than yourself. I can tell you this, for me, this was a huge struggle. I didn't believe in God when I was attempting to get sober, but I was desperate enough to try whatever I was told to do, and I did. And so over time, I could not argue with the fact that my life was getting better by doing certain things every day, certain sober disciplines, like praying to a God I couldn't see, hear, know, describe, or anything else, but just kind of turning my life over and having some faith in something greater than me. So in this case, we're having, again, humbly asking him to remove our shortcomings, right? So it's done through prayer and through talking to God, talking to our higher power, talking to whatever you use as a higher power. Step 7 is where we start to change sort of our outlook on how we appear to other people. As I've said earlier, ego is a big part of our problem. Humility starts to take place in step 7. So we humbly ask God or ask him to remove our shortcomings. That's done through prayer, through turning our will and our lives over to the care of God, as we did in step 3, the God of our understanding, and it's also done through other spiritual acts like meditation. So let's turn to step 8. Made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So in step 8, we take the list that we created in step 4 and talked about in step 5, and we now have a list of people that we've harmed. And there's not that much work to do in step 8 other than become willing to make amends. There's some people that may not still be alive, that making amends would be impossible to. We do things like living amends. Perhaps we make a donation to a charity that we know that person was involved in or had a warm spot for. Or perhaps we do something for a family member related to that person. In some way, we make amends. But for those people that are still alive, we have to humbly sit down with those people and talk about what happened and talk about what we did and make amends for it. Not I'm sorry, it's taking responsibility, because most of us have said we're sorry too many times. So it's about taking responsibility for what we did. And by the time you're at step 8 and 9, because at 9 you're actually sitting with them, but when you're at 8 and 9, your life has changed pretty dramatically. And the person you're sitting across from, if they know you well and you've done things to them, they can see that your life has changed pretty dramatically. So they're usually pretty happy to be sitting with you. So step 9, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. That says a lot, right? So we've already talked about sitting down and having a conversation. We talked about that's the result of the list you made in step 8. But it's also, sometimes you don't make an amends to someone that you've harmed because you might make it worse. Let me give you an example. You're not going to make an amends to a spouse that you had an affair that they don't know about. You're going to get that off your chest by giving it to them. How's that going to help the relationship? How's that going to help you? How's that going to help them? So that's when the book is talking about would injure them or others. You don't want to injure them by getting things off your chest. Likewise, if you had an affair with your neighbor's wife, you're not going to go to your neighbor and say, hey, I'm sorry I had an affair with your wife, because he may not know about it, and you may destroy a marriage and destroy some lives, and just to get that off your chest. So keep that in mind, and your sponsor, I'm sure, will be steering you in these things. So now we're at step 10. So step 10 says, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Now the reason we have to do step 4, where we take that inventory, is that we've collected all these things we've done our whole lives. And now we're, in steps 4 and 5, we're having to deal with these. And in 8 and 9, we're getting ready to make amends and actually making amends. In step 10, often this is called a maintenance step. I don't really like that name, but what it really is keeping track of the things we've done now that we wished we hadn't done. Things we've done now that we can apologize for now before they get to be big. I remember the first time I apologized for something under these circumstances, the person I apologized to looked at me like I had 3 heads, like, you've never apologized for anything before in your life. And they could see that I was a different person because now I was taking responsibility immediately. No argument, no discussion, you didn't have to convince me of it. I'm just stepping up and taking responsibility. Step 10 will change your relationship with people, okay? So step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. What does that mean? We're going to communicate with our higher power every day, God as we understand Him. Whatever our higher power is, we're going to communicate with Him every day. The suggestion is that you pray and meditate. When I pray, I'm talking to God. When I'm meditating, I'm listening for answers. That's why it's in that order, prayer and meditation. So I'm going to pray and meditate every day, trying to find out from that communication and the relationship that I'm building. That's what this is about. We're building a relationship with a higher power, where now if we're communicating consistently, I know right away what I'm expected to do. Very often I think to myself, now being sober for a while, that if I have 2 choices of things to do, well, what's the right thing to do? I've heard it said many times in the rooms of AA, what's the next right thing? That's all I have to worry about is the next right thing. Well, the way we know the next right thing is through our communication with our higher power. So step 11 is also what's considered a maintenance step, as is step number 12, which step number 12 is kind of the denouement. You've reached the apex of getting through the 12 steps, and it's having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Again, that says a lot, and we're going to go through that a lot when we get through the 12th step. But what it really says is, we've done a lot of work in these first 11 steps, and we're continuing to do work. And we've changed. We've had a spiritual awakening. We have a relationship with a higher power now. We communicate with that higher power every day. We turn things over to that higher power. We also try to think of what's the next right thing to do. Instead of being loud and aggressive and letting our ego talk for ourselves, we become more humble and we start to have a little bit of patience. And those are the changes that happen as part of the spiritual awakening. And then we carry the message. We try to help newcomers, right? We try to help them get started, because that's our real job in Alcoholics Anonymous once we've begun to get sober ourselves, is to help another alcoholic to achieve sobriety. So those are the 12 steps in summary. I hope you've learned a little bit from them. I've enjoyed doing this, and I'm looking forward to doing each step individually. So again, my name's Tony Foster, and it's the 12 steps according to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and 12 steps and 12 traditions. And we'll see you again soon with step 1.